Notre Dame fans, Irish Breakdown Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. That's Ryan Roberts. I'm Brian Driscoll. It's like when you sit down like that, Ryan, like it just like frames that Irish Breakdown. You got like the sun coming through the curtains. I mean, it's like looking iconic. Man, had that dark yesterday. Like now you're just kind of showing off the stash that you're growing out there. You know what I mean? Like
very majestic feel today.
Yeah,
Brian.
man.
Very majestic.
Yeah, no doubt. It's a great time because today we're talking about predictions for the Gator Bowl. Notre Dame tomorrow takes on South Carolina in the Tax Slayer Gator Bowl. That's the only time you will hear me say that. I will just give that little shout out to the sponsor. But other than that, it's the Gator Bowl. I miss it when it was just the Gator Bowl. Although I did like the Tostitos Fiesta Bowl because I felt like that had a nice ring to it. And it made sense, they went together. I don't know what Tax Slayer has to do with Gators, but it is what it is. But this is a big game for Notre Dame, Ryan, and we've talked a lot about this game. We broke it down. And I know that we're in that era where people say, oh, bowl games don't matter and whatever. I think they matter. If you look at them in the right context, I think people can overhype a bowl result, but I think that people can also too easily dismiss the importance of it. And is it important from the standpoint of how this 2023 team, 22 team will be viewed? Somewhat. I mean, 9-4 versus 8-5, perception on the recruiting trail, things like that matters. But as I've said before, Ryan, the reason, as we kind of look at like what's at stake for Notre Dame, there's a lot of individual things at stake. We talked about in the keys to the game. There's going to be some individual players saying, hey, Tyler Buckner, you want to have a chance to compete for the starting job in the spring when they get a transfer guy in. This is your chance to show what you're capable of being as the starting quarterback in Notre Dame, right? This is your chance to show, hey, I can sit there and I can use my arm and I can do all these kind of things. Tobias Merriweather, Deion Colsey, Lorenzo Styles, you guys want to be the dudes. This is your chance to kind of step up and show that you can be the dude. Hey, you want to take over as the for Isaiah Foskey, or you want to be a linebacker that pushes for a starting job, or you want to do whatever. This is an audition for you. It's not the only audition, but it is an audition. So there's individual player aspects to it. But the biggest thing for me as a program is I just think there's a lot of momentum. I mean, think about how much of the excitement of Marcus Freeman's hire got sapped when they lost Oklahoma State in the Fiesta Bowl last year. Mm-hmm. There's just a lot of people that kind of took them down a little bit. And I think a win is something that gives this team and the fan base momentum, positive vibes as they head into the offseason, which I think is going to be a really exciting and fun offseason, Ryan. So people can dismiss bowl games don't matter. I dismiss that. I think this matters, and I think it especially matters when you look at Notre Dame being in year one, trying to really get some momentum as a program under Marcus Freeman.
Well, and I think both sides care about this football game, even on the South Carolina side of things too, Brian. I mean, we talked about it yesterday, right? If you're South Carolina, getting to that 9th win, second year under Shane Beamer, beating a Notre Dame team after beating Tennessee in decisive fashion and then beating Clemson. I mean, that's a 3-game stretch to end the season to be proud of if you're South Carolina under a second-year head coach. So being able to beat the brands that you've beaten on that side, I think, is a tremendous opportunity for South Carolina. And I think Notre Dame, to your point, on the other side of it is, hey, not only is 9-4 a lot better than 8-5 just from a perception stake, you also beat an SEC team. You beat a team that had just beaten Tennessee handedly, who was control their own destiny to potentially make the playoffs and fight for a national championship. And then you beat a Clemson team that's, kind of, I know Notre Dame beat them this year, but they've been a thorn in your side a little bit over the last couple
years. Clemson is a playoff team if they beat South Carolina.
Yes.
South Carolina knocked 2 teams out of the playoff. Mm-hmm. Notre Dame had a chance to do that, and they got beat when they played USC. So, it wasn't just beating a good Clemson team that's been a thorn in your side. You're correct on that, Ryan. But Clemson is in the playoff if they beat South Carolina and then North Carolina in the ACC title game.
Yep. So, there's been a little bit of South Carolina's kind of the giant killer over the last few weeks, and now they have a chance to beat a premier program, a program that has obviously the prestige behind them, has the fanfare. Notre Dame's a big brand, and if you don't think that South Carolina is coming into this game, even though they are going to be down a few of their key players ready to play, I think you're wrong. I do. I think that South Carolina is going to be ready to play.
Oh, yeah.
I think Notre Dame is going to be ready to play. I'm looking forward to this game because I think there's both on the line for both sides of the coin. And I think that Notre Dame hopefully is going to come in with energy and ready to play in this football game because it does matter in a lot of instances.
Yeah, there's no question. And we had a question from John A1. We're not doing a mailbag today, so we're just going to do previews of the Notre Dame game or predictions of the Notre Dame game. Then we'll dive into the games tonight, Oklahoma and Florida State, and then Texas-Washington. We'll preview some of the New Year's Six games, and we'll preview the college football playoff games and make our predictions for those as well. But we won't be doing a mailbag because I got to run today and head to the airport because I'm heading down to Jacksonville today. So there were some issues with my flight. I decided to cancel my Southwest flight before I drove to Chicago. Looking at it now, that was probably a really smart move because there was already some issues, and I decided not to do that. So I'll be flying out of South Bend today. So that'll be looking forward to getting down there for the game tomorrow. But one thing that John A1 did talk about, he did ask a mailbag question we're not going to get to, but I think it's relevant to this conversation, Ryan, is, how did the Oklahoma State loss impact the Notre Dame 2022 team? I think with some veteran players, based on some things I've been told, that how that game played out created some doubt in some of the veterans' minds about, okay, am I going to completely buy into what Marcus Freeman is selling at this point in time? And there were some issues with some veteran players this year at times, kind of with the whole, well, I love Coach Freeman, but Coach Kelly would have done it this way, right? So there's this thing of they love Coach Freeman as a man, but they bought into the hype of Kelly wins thing, right?
Yep.
And so when Coach would do something different that maybe Kelly wouldn't have done, or practices were harder, or whatever the case may be, there was some pushback. Some of it externally, a lot of it internally, that kind of hurt this team's overall demeanor, in my opinion. And I think how the bowl game played out and losing that game, especially the way they lost the game, right, did in fact impact 2022. Now, can I directly impact and say they lost to Marshall because of that? No, I can't do that. Mm-hmm. Right. A lot of that is very subjective, but I'm a believer in that. I feel like a lot of success they had in 2015 had to do with the fact that they finished the season off on such a strong note against LSU, even though they had lost the previous 4 games, right? Mm-hmm. But it sent them in like, hey, we are pretty good, man. We just beat an SEC team, and we head into the – no, it wasn't a very good SEC team, but it's still an SEC team. It's still that stigma, and there's still that perception. So that's clearly what's at stake for Notre Dame in this game, Ryan. Yep. Look, we've broken it down, man, right? You and Vince had a show. We did a show. We talked about the 5 keys to victory on both sides of the ball yesterday. We've really analyzed what needs to happen for Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. So it's prediction time. And we're going to make our predictions here. We're going to kind of talk about, what our predictions are, obviously. And then we'll talk about, how we see the game being played out within our predictions. And then we're going to hand out game balls that if our predictions come true, here's why we think that'll happen, Ryan. So I'm going to allow you to do the honors and kick off things first. What is your score prediction? Well, let me first give the other staff numbers, and then I'll let you kick things off. So the rest of the IB staff, Vince D'Addario predicted Notre Dame. And by the way, it's Vince's birthday. He's currently enjoying a nice little meal at Olive Garden with his family on his birthday. So if you guys follow Vince on Twitter, give him a birthday shout out. So he's one of the few grown-ups in their 40s that actually have birthday party. He texted, I was busting the texted last night. He's like, I have a birthday party. I was like, aren't you a little bit old to be having a birthday party? He's like, well, it's a meal at Olive Garden. I said, so you're having a birthday dinner. You're not having a birthday party.
I thought when we were texting about that, Brian, I thought it was like one of his kids' birthdays or something like that.
It's his. But wish Vince a happy birthday. That's my guy, and I hope he has a great, wonderful birthday. And Notre Dame can give him a nice birthday win here tomorrow. But Vince predicted Notre Dame to win 38-24. Sean Davis predicted Notre Dame to win 27-20. Sean Stiers predicted a 30-22 Irish victory, and Andrew McDonough predicted a 30-21 Irish victory. So, Ryan Roberts, what is your prediction, and how do you see this game playing out?
Yeah, I mean, my prediction was 34-20, and this is one where I kind of wrestled back and forth a little bit between what the final score would be because, I mean, folks, I'll be very honest. I think there is a reality where Notre Dame blows the doors off of South Carolina. I do think that that's possible. I think that they have more talent than what South Carolina has, and then you add in what South Carolina is missing, even though Notre Dame is also missing Michael Mayer and Isaiah Foskey in this game. I think that Notre Dame has a pretty clear advantage on a lot of fronts, right? And I think that when you're looking at South Carolina, I agree with something that you said yesterday, Brian, that you think that South Carolina is probably not really the team that you've seen the last 2 weeks. They're not the team, though, that lost badly in a poor game against Florida either. They're somewhere in between.
And
They're
Georgia.
quality.
And
Yes.
Missouri, right? Yep. Like, they've had their bad days like Notre Dame's had their bad days against Marshall and Stanford.
Yep. And I think they're a quality football team. I think they're a young football team. I think they're buying into what Shane Beamer's doing, which is very important in year 2 for sure. But when you don't have your leading rusher on a team that was already not a very good rushing team, when you don't have your 2 tight ends that limits you to now 1 real healthy tight end on your roster, when you don't have your 2 starting corners on a defense that lives off of stopping the pass and isn't a very good run defense. And by the way, your best run defender in the front 7, Zach Pickens, is also not playing in this football game. I feel like you're making a couple weaknesses on the South Carolina team even weaker, and a couple of those absences are going to affect the strengths of what South Carolina has been built on this year. So I think it's going to be 34-20 is what I finally predicted. Again, I think it could be even more lopsided than that ultimately, but I think Notre Dame has the chance to control this game. You're getting back a talented quarterback. You still have the brunt of what has made you successful this year is still intact, right? It is. The offensive line is still there. The running game is still there. You still have players on defense that you can count on. I don't think that the loss of Drew Pine and Michael Mayer is going to be as much as I don't think it's going to be a massive hindrance, because I think of how your team is truly built. It's still built from the inside out as a running based team. So adding a guy adding back players that you have, been hopeful for, and adding
Tobias
back in a Tyler
coming back, right?
Exactly.
Tyler Buckner coming back, right?
Exactly. Yep. Adding in a Tyler Buckner now with that dynamic element he has, as long as he's healthy, I think that if anything, Notre Dame's offense is going to get more explosive in this football game. So give me him 34-20. I think they have a pretty decisive victory over South Carolina.
And if the game plays out the way that you think it's going to be played, Ryan, who gets your game balls on offense, defense, and special teams?
Yeah, I mean, I was back and forth. Yesterday we had a question about the breakout or the game ball, basically your player of the game on the offense. I said I hope it's Tyler Buckner, but the player I predicted earlier in the week, and I think even last week, I think Deion Colzie is going to have a big game. I do. He's my guy. And I know you said yesterday, that any of the wide receivers would be a great player to be the player of the game, but I really think that Deion Colzie has shown that there's a little bit of a clutch factor to him over the last few weeks. He's showing that there's confidence building in him. So give me Deion being the breakout start receiver to combine with Tobias Merriweather and the rest of the crew. So I think offensively, give me Deion in this one. Defensively, I still lean towards the Viper position. That's the spot. And I'm not going to necessarily name one guy, because I know that we're expecting Jordan Botelho to get some reps. We're expecting Junior Tuihalamaka, maybe Joshua Burnham, maybe Ingo Byra. I think in general, though, that Viper position is going to be able to create some pressure in the absence of Isaiah Foskey, and they might collect a couple sacks tomorrow with a few pressures. So give me the pressure situation against Spencer Rattler on defense. Offensively, I think Deion Colzie is the breakout star in this one.
Special teams? Did you give special teams?
I did not give a special teams. I'll say
normally it wouldn't matter, but this is one of those games where it's like, it might matter a little bit more.
Right. I think for me, it's going to be it's a tough conversation for me between whether it is Zach Yoakum as the kickoff guy, because obviously South Carolina is a really good kick return team, right? And they're also a good punt return team. So if you want to tell me it's the punting game, if you want to tell me it's the kickoff game, I think the key to the victory for the special teams, or a big key to their success in general, is the kick coverage and the punt coverage. So if they're able to kind of pin them deep, maybe some coffin corners, those types of things, don't allow explosive returns on the special team side of things.
So here's my prediction, Ryan. We're not that far off. We have a very similar spread. I just have a little bit more scoring from both teams. I have Notre Dame winning 37-24. Here's my prediction within the prediction, however. This is the minimum for me and my prediction of what Notre Dame's margin of victory will be. The minimum. It could go more, because here's how I think this game is going to play out. They're either going to play really well and whoop South Carolina, or they're going to lose. Like, I don't see Notre Dame winning by a field goal. I think if they're playing that sloppy, it's probably happening on both sides of the ball, and it means South Carolina is going to make some plays. Now, South Carolina is going to be without, we talked yesterday, Ryan, about some of the guys that they're going to have, and, some of the talent players are going to have, and their offense is now missing even more than we thought, because coming into we knew Josh Vann was questionable. He is out. They listed it. So we had said early in the prep that he was out, and then they listed him on the depth chart, but he's out. But then Jalen Brooks was finally ruled out, I think yesterday. He was doubtful. I guess he's not even injured. He's got some other off-the-field issue going on, so he was listed as doubtful. He is now going to be out. But there's still plenty of weapons there. I feel like if this is a close game with all those weapons out, it's because Notre Dame's not playing well. And if they're not playing well, they're going to play into South Carolina's hands, which means giving up big plays in the pass game and turning the ball over on offense. That's kind of me. It'll look a lot like, honestly, Marshall, to be honest with you. They're turning the ball over. Tyler Buckner's not accurate. He's not hitting throws. He's not making plays. Then you take his running ability out. Notre Dame may run the ball, but the defense is going to be sloppy. They're going to give up big plays. They're not going to be good on third down, and they're going to lose. If they win, I think it's because they're playing well. They're dominating in the trenches. Tyler Buckner's getting the ball where it needs to go, and Notre Dame is going to go out there and see some young players step up and be stars. So I don't think it's going to be close. Now, South Carolina is more than capable of beating Notre Dame. They are. And if they play the way they did the last 2 games of the year, I think they beat Notre Dame. I just don't think, like I said, that's who they are, and I think the matchup is different. This is a much better pass defense than those 2 teams. Tennessee and Clemson have 2 of the worst pass defenses in college football. Now, I know statistically Clemson didn't always rank really low because their front was able to kind of bail them out a lot, but you and I have talked about this. That is a bad pass defense, in my opinion. And even with how good their front 7 was, they still ranked 76th in the nation in passing yards allowed. And Tennessee ranked 126th in the nation in passing yards allowed. So I don't think either one of those teams, to me, were really quality pass defenses. And so I think the matchup was very favorable to South Carolina. It should not be that way in this game. And if you slow down South Carolina's pass attack, they have no chance to be competitive in this game. You see what I'm saying, Ryan? So, like, if you shut that down, this game's not close. If you can't shut that down, I don't think you win. I think that's kind of where I'm coming from in this game. So I don't think it's going to be I have a 7-point game one way or the other. It's either going to be a blowout for Notre Dame or South Carolina is going to win. That's my prediction within my prediction. Now, the reason I predict it the way that I do kind of ties into my game ball. So I'm actually flipping the script a little bit on what I said yesterday. Yesterday I talked about a receiver, and so here's how I think this game is going to play out. I think Notre Dame's going to be a little rusty early, which is why I have a 13-point margin instead of a 20-point margin. Because, again, I'm going with what should happen, not necessarily like the kind of prediction I would make if I was putting money in Vegas. That's the reason I don't bet, right? But what should happen based on the matchups, based on who Notre Dame is, based on who South Carolina is at this point in time, I think Notre Dame will be a little bit rusty early. But then I think Tyler Buckner, about second or third series, is just going to hit a pass down the field that's going to kind of spark him and spark this offense. It's either going to be like a seam route or a one-on-one outside. And then that's going to kind of soften things up. And I think you're going to see Deion Colsey make a couple plays. I think you're going to see Tobias make a couple plays. And I think either Braden Lindsey or Lorenzo Styles is going to rip off a big play in the pass game. That's going to then open up the run game. And I think in the second half, Audric Estime and Logan Diggs just hammer South Carolina. And that's how Notre Dame pulls away in the second half with a big win, in my opinion. So my game ball is going to Audric Estime because I think he's going to be the guy that gets the most touchdowns. I think him and Logan Diggs are both going to have really good games, but he's going to have couple more because he's going to be that fourth quarter hammer that puts the game away, and that's going to be fresh on the minds of the player of the game voters and me, and he's going to put he's going to have the scores to put that game away. And I also think he's going to get a couple checkdowns in this game. Teams have leaving him wide open, and against a cover one team, one of the big plays of this game, the play that maybe could spring Tyler Buckner, it may be a deep shot like I predict, but it could also be he drops back, cover one bails. They blitz up the middle. He checks it down on the outside to Audric Estime or Logan Diggs for a big play. So I'm going with Estime as the player of the game because I think in the second half, I think the pass game is going to soften South Carolina up early. But then once Notre Dame gets up, they're going to go right back to just running it right down their throat and just putting this game away in the second half, playing Notre Dame football. And it's going to show that this is a balanced team that can beat. If you want to overplay the run, we're going to rip you with the pass. So I think they'll do early. And then that's going to soften them up. And in the second half, if South Carolina tries to adjust to defend the whole width and vertical of the field as well as the pass, that's when Audric Estime and this offensive line are going to take this game over. That's my prediction for the offense, and that's how I think it will happen. If on the flip side, if Notre Dame does shut down the South Carolina pass defense, then I think the safeties are going to be a big part of that. And I think you're going to see the safeties making a lot of plays on the football. I think the corners are going to play well. They're not going to test Benjamin Morrison, in my opinion, as much. I think they'll, you could see, look, he's going to be matched up against Wells, right? I mean, they're going to take some shots, but they're not going to test him a lot. They're going to test the corners and the safeties a lot. And I think Xavier Watts, I'm leaning hard into what we talked about yesterday. I think Xavier Watts is going to have two game-changing plays in this game. One's going to be a pick, and the other one's either going to be a ball that he bats that somebody else picks, a ball that he knocks out, or a ball that he recovers from a fumble standpoint. So that's kind of why I'm going Xavier Watts. I think the safeties are going to have to be impactful in this game. If they don't play well, then you're going to see South Carolina, Ryan, and you mentioned this yesterday, even without Brooks and Van, with Wells and some of the other young receivers, with Juju McDowell, if Notre Dame doesn't tackle in space, there's still plenty of athletes on this South Carolina football team that can hurt you, right? So this isn't like, hey, they're two of their three best receivers are out. We got this. Nope. Don't even think that for a second. There are still cats there that can hurt you, including, Juice Wells. So that's kind of how I see it playing out. It's going to be safety play. And I think the pass rush will be important and all that kind of stuff. But South Carolina does a pretty decent job when they're struggling to protect the quarterback of trying to get the ball out quickly. And I think that's where you could see the safety make a lot of plays. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. You get a good early pass rush, and then Spencer starts trying to rush stuff. And that's where Xavier Watts steps in front of a slant or a cross or a quick post or a quick seam and picks one off. That's where he comes down and drills a guy, ball flies up in the air into the arms of Benjamin Morrison or Jaden Mickey or somebody like that. That's why I see him playing a big part of this game. So, yeah.
I feel like we didn't talk enough about Brian. I mean, Xavier Watts was really good against USC, right? Like, he's flashed tremendously over the last couple games. I mean, he had a couple plays on the football in that USC game where, one thing happens here or there, and he may have came down with two interceptions. I know the one he was kind of interfered with, obviously that prevented that one, but I think he's due for a turnover or two in this football game, man. I think he's flying around and he's seeing the game pretty well. So I'm all here for the Xavier Watts breakout, man. I really am. So I think that he has a lot of traits that you really want to build off in that safety room. Agree completely.
Yep. Now my special teams guy is going to be simple. It's going to be John Sott. Mm-hmm. And he's going to end his career the way he's kind of done it all year. He's not going to boom a bunch of 60-yard shots, but he's going to kick that sucker high, let the coverage team get down there, and they're going to have very little return yardage. And it's going to really help Notre Dame win the field battle. Because I believe that really the special teams comes down to two things, Ryan. Don't make big mistakes. No turnovers, no big returns, and no missed kicks. But the other part of the key for the special teams is make South Carolina go 75+ every time they touch the ball. If you can make them go 75+ every time they touch the ball, unless Notre Dame just stinks in this game, they're not going to be able to score enough to beat you if you're off, unless your offense stinks and your defense stinks. So I think that he's going to be my key. That there's not going to be any big force tackles. I don't think they're going to block a punt. I'd love it if I'm wrong on that, but this is a really well coached South Carolina special teams. I don't see them blocking kicks. I don't see them getting any long returns like that. It's just play sound football, but don't let them get any returns, which plays into your thing of Zach Yoakum, right? So we're coming from it from a very similar standpoint. You're going with the kick return deal. I'm going with the punting deal. And I hope that you're closer to being right, because if you're right and I'm wrong, it means there's a lot more kickoffs and punts in this game.
A lot more scoring. Yeah.
And that would be a positive thing for Notre Dame. So that is going to do it for our prediction for Notre Dame. We're going to dive into some other battles here, Ryan, but I think that a double-digit victory for Notre Dame in this game is not going to be easy to do, but they're certainly capable of it. They're also capable of losing this game, but I do think this is the kind of thing this is the way the game should play out, in my view. When you look at the talent matchups and the talent advantages that Notre Dame has, it's how the game should play out. And I also think it's the kind of momentum-gaining victory that Notre Dame needs in this game. Winning is all. If they win 21-20, don't care. It's a win. Go into the offseason with some positive vibes of a team that's ranked higher than you, that just beat back-to-back top 10 teams in back-to-back games. A 1-point win is good for Notre Dame. I'm simply saying a really convincing win over this team after what they did at the end to end their season would be huge for this program, gaining a lot of confidence, and would erase any lingering doubts that people may have about whether or not Marcus Freeman is the guy for Notre Dame. I think it would go a long way towards that.
Yep. No, I agree completely. I think that this is a big opportunity for Notre Dame. I mean, for all the reasons that we've already talked about, and more than anything, a momentum builder or momentum gainer going into the offseason. Again, I know that we hyper focus on the negatives a lot, and I understand it, right? Like, I get it. There was a couple puzzling losses for Notre Dame this year, but if you go into this offseason with a big victory over an SEC team, going into year 2 under Marcus Freeman, I feel like there's a lot of momentum to be gained from this game.
Ryan, let's dive into our kind of preview and predictions of some other big bowl games. We're going to dive into just kind of quickly talk about the 2 games tonight, because I think these are could potentially be 2 very entertaining games, although I hope one of them is at least a blowout. I am. So I have two teams that I'm now rooting against strongly. One of them got a win that just was handed to them last night in Oregon. The other one's Oklahoma. I've never really loved Oklahoma, but I have a lot more reason to dislike Oklahoma now. And so we'll dive into a little bit of that. Then we'll do the New Year's 6 games briefly, especially focusing on that Tennessee-Clemson game, and then we'll get into the playoff games. First game I want to look at, Ryan, is tonight. And we've got a couple really I think could potentially be entertaining games tonight. And the first one we're going to talk about is at 5:30 this evening. And that is it'll be Camping World Stadium in Orlando, Florida. And that is the matchup between Florida State and Oklahoma. I'm very curious to see how this game kind of plays out, Ryan. This is a Cheez-It Bowl matchup. I'm a fan of Cheez-Its, so, like that aspect of it. But look, this is a big game, in my opinion, Ryan, for both of these teams. As of yesterday, Florida State was a 9.5-point favorite. Oklahoma, obviously, it's key, right? Like, you're 6-6. You end the first season with a losing record if you lose tonight. If you win tonight, then all of a sudden you're looking at saying, hey, look, it was a rough year, but we ended it strong. You had a good recruiting class at the end. You had some nice wins at the end on the recruiting trail. You go into the offseason with a win. You've got some decent guys coming back. I believe Dylan Gabriel announced he's coming back, so you'll have your quarterback back. You go into year 2 of your system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of a sudden now Oklahoma gets a little bit of positive vibes, although 7-6 is still nothing to be super excited about. But at least it's a positive momentum like we talk about for Notre Dame. For Florida State, Ryan, this is an opportunity to really culminate what has been a turnaround season for the Seminoles. And I got to give Mike Norvell a lot of credit, because I really thought Florida State was ready to implode this season. They start the season off, they get a big win over LSU, huge program needle-moving win for them, getting back on track. Go on the road the next week, you beat Louisville, and then you smack Boston College. You're 4-0, you're ranked in the top 25, and then all of a sudden you get smacked at home by Wake Forest. I mean, just absolutely smacked 31-21 at home by Wake Forest. And, you just get absolutely ripped up. Sam Hartman comes in, throws for 234 yards. Wake Forest goes out and has some success, forcing some mistakes. You have a chance to win that game, and you're not able to win that game. And it was, simply put, Ryan, it was a bad loss, right? It just was a really bad loss. And they say, okay, well, how do you bounce back from that? Well, they bounce back by just choking a game away against NC State. I mean, you watch some of the mistakes that happened in that game, you're like, oh, they're back to being what they were before, right? And then, of course, the next week they go lose to Clemson. Then they competed against Clemson, but it wasn't a very close game. It wasn't nearly as close as the final score dictated. I think it was like a 6-point game. It was like 31-13 at one point in time, but they didn't quit. And you sit there and think, man, all the positive vibes from the early in the season are just completely gone. And I thought they were ready to fold. I did. I thought they were back to being what they were. And they not only won their next 5 games, they destroyed their next 4 opponents. And really, Florida played out of their minds and still couldn't beat Florida. They beat Georgia Tech by 25. They beat Miami on the road by 42. They beat Syracuse on the road by 35. They beat Louisiana Lafayette by 32. And then they beat their rival Florida in the end of the season 45-38. This is one of the hottest teams in the country heading into bowl season right now, Ryan, in Florida State. If they lose to Oklahoma, all that's gone. All the momentum's gone, in my opinion. If they win, however, this is the most kind of energy that is going to surround this program in a long time. And it could be that type of win. It's not a very good opponent, but it's a name opponent. It's a brand opponent. And if you can finish your season with a win over LSU, Miami, and Oklahoma, that's 3 huge brands that you were able to get wins over. All of a sudden, Mike Norvell's program is starting to rock and roll at the time when Clemson is starting to slowly descend Florida State can shoot up, and that could make the ACC very entertaining in coming seasons, Ryan. So that's kind of my overview of why this game entertains me.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a really interesting game. I'm curious because, I mean, I'll be very honest. Mike Norvell, I was a little skeptical of coming into the season, right? I thought this was kind of a make it or break it year for him. And I think he made it a little bit. He's quieted some doubters. And I think the team overall really bought in this year. Jordan Travis, the ascension he's had, the improvement that he had from last year to this year, just over the last couple of years in general. Jared Verse having a big season, transferring over from Albany. I mean, the running backs that they have, Trayshawn Ward and those boys. I mean, Florida State, I think, took a really nice step forward. And I ended up picking 38-24 Florida State. And I think, honestly, Brian, I might be underestimating what this score outcome is as far as what the difference in total is at the end of the football game, because I just am not in on Oklahoma, man. I think that they're a little fractured from a confidence level perspective. They got shocked this year, and I think they'll score a little bit in this football game because I still think Dylan Gabriel is a good college quarterback that can score some points. I think Marvin Mims is a talented receiver. I think Eric Gray has actually quietly had a really nice season as a running back for the most part. So I think they'll score a little bit, but I just think Florida State is a team that believes in their direction, believes in their head coach, and I can't say the same against Oklahoma right now. I don't know if this team is fully invested. I don't know if they've given up. I'm just not sure. Every time I see them, I feel like they just don't play it totally inspired for the most part. So give me Florida State mostly because they got more of their guys. They played a better just in the entirety of the season. And I think that they're much more bought in than what Oklahoma is right now.
I think they have more talent across the board, honestly. Yes. And look, a lot of Florida State's best players chose to opt in. And a lot of, Eric Gray's not playing. He's been their primary weapon on offense this year. He's not playing. I don't think Theo Weiss is going to play in this game. Although Marvin Mims, I believe, is still playing in this game, correct? And he's clearly their best receiver. So I agree. I don't think it's a program that's bought in. And they just have – there's even in some of their wins, Ryan, they had some very uninspiring wins this year, Oklahoma. You beat Oklahoma State 28-13. They tried to let Oklahoma State get back in that game. They gave Oklahoma State every chance. Oklahoma says, no, we're good. We don't want that. We don't want that. You talk about this ugly win over Iowa State. They beat Kansas. They beat Nebraska, who stinks. They beat Kent State. They beat UTEP. What's the win you're hanging your hat on this year? Kansas? Right? Oklahoma State, who's not good.
Even the UTEP game was kind of ugly for a while, man. Yeah. They let them stay in there for a little bit.
Then there was a long delay. It was really a weird game. It was a really weird game. But, this is just not a very good football team. And Florida State's smacking people. So I think Florida State's going to win and win handily, Ryan. You went 38-24, correct? I went 37-21. I see that as Oklahoma scoring late to make it 37-21. I don't think it's going to be a competitive game. I don't
think so either. Yeah.
The other game tonight, Ryan, and that is that game. This game is going to be, I think, could potentially be one of the more entertaining games of the bowl season, depending on what version of Texas shows up. That's going to be at 9:00 tonight on ESPN, and it is the Alamo Bowl. Or wait a minute, hold on a second. Yeah, it's the Alamo Bowl, correct?
Yes.
Yes. I was reading my thing, and I saw Holiday Bowl in my article, and I was like, wait a minute, no. That's the last time they played was in the Holiday Bowl. But you have the Alamo Bowl tonight in San Antonio, Texas, between the number 12 Washington Huskies and the number 20 Texas Longhorns. This is a very intriguing matchup, Ryan, because Washington's going to have most of their guys playing. Michael Penix announced he's coming back for another year, which is huge. But, man, Kalen DeBoer did a great job with this team because he inherited a absolute dumpster fire of a program. Jimmy Lake, there were so many issues going on with Washington, and Jimmy Lake just did a really poor job. They went 4-8 last year, Ryan, and averaged 21.5 points per game.
Yeah.
This year they went 10-2. One of their losses, both of their losses were single digits. They lost to UCLA by 8 and Arizona State by 7, although the UCLA loss by 8 was not as competitive as the final score showed, in my opinion. No. Mm-hmm. But they went 10-2, had some really good wins late in the year, beat Washington State convincingly in the Apple Cup at the end of the year. Went on the road and beat Oregon, grinded out a tough Oregon State team at home. And I'm going to be honest, I think that was their most impressive win to me of the season. Yep. Because what that game showed me is they can win when their offense isn't lights out. Mm-hmm. They can go into a grinded out game where the other team's defense is slowing them down and still win. There's a lot of teams with high octane offenses that you get them into that kind of slugfest and they can't win. And in matter of fact, their 2 losses were shootouts. but they were able to win the grinded out game. And I'll tell you what, man, this team is fun to watch. He did a phenomenal job turning that team around. 4-8 in a team that can't score to a 10-2 team that is really fun to watch. And getting Michael Penix back for another year is huge for them. Absolutely huge for them. So, and then you've got Texas, who went 8-4 this year. Obviously, their record was not great, but this is a team that was in every game that they lost, Ryan. And I think the only game that I felt they didn't have a chance to win was the TCU game. It was not as close as 17-10. They had a defensive touchdown to get their 10. I mean, they couldn't move the ball, but every other game they had a chance to beat Alabama, they had a chance to beat Texas Tech, and they had a chance to beat Oklahoma State. And then they had some quality wins this year, went on the road to beat a good Kansas State team, had a 49-0 beat down of Texas, beat Baylor in a quality game late in the year. So Texas has shown some potential this year, Ryan, but two things. Number one, you just never know what version of Texas you're going to get from week to week. And number two, not only did Bijan Robinson opt out of this game, but Roschon Johnson, their number 2 back, opted out of this game. And they were mostly a running football team this year because they just didn't want to put the game on Quinn Ewers' shoulders. They're going to have to put this game on Quinn Ewers' shoulders, Ryan. And that's going to make this a very intriguing matchup because you have an 8-4 Texas team that's missing some guys, and then you have this 10-2 red-hot team. This is a chance for Washington to get a huge name brand victory. And then you chalk that up to kind of what they've been able to do this year. In his first year, Kalen DeBoer will have a win over Michigan State. He will have a win over Oregon, and he will have a win over Texas. Right. That's 3 brands, and brand wins matter when it comes to recruiting. Huge opportunity for them. And for Texas, this is the kind of big game victory they need to go into the offseason with a lot of, hey, we didn't have Bijan, we didn't have Roschon. Quinn Ewers is going to have to step up and win this game. That gets some of the pressure off of his shoulders and some of the doubters that are there around him. Big opportunity for both teams, Ryan. And these are one of those games people say bowl games don't matter. This game flat out matters for these two football teams heading into next season because as Sark struggles again down the stretch of this game, all of a sudden, Ryan, people start saying, like, maybe he's just a really good coordinator. Maybe he's not a great head coach. Now, whether that's true or not, it's beside the point. But that's the narrative that starts to kind of come about if they lose this game and finish year 2 going 8-5.
No doubt. I think you laid it out perfectly. I would say for me, Quinn Ewers just wasn't very good after he came back from injury. Like, he just hasn't been, right? Like, I wish that we could be sitting in this football game right now and say, hey, Bijan Robinson is a massive loss. The kid's going in the first round. He's a baller. Best running back in college football. Roschon Johnson's a quality running back that's going to get drafted this year in the NFL draft as well. Like, he's a good football player. Even without those guys, I would like if we were able to sit here and say, but you know what? This is the Quinn Ewers breakout because he's been showing signs. It's just you just had 2 studs at running back during the year. Let's let him open it up. Xavier Worthy, Jatavion Sanders. They have some talent in the passing game. They do. But Quinn Ewers just hasn't inspired me down the stretch of the season. He hasn't. Washington, I believe, and I talked a little bit about this in the previous game as far as teams buying in. And I think Washington has bought fully into Kalen DeBoer. They have, because you talk about Michael Penix coming back. Apparently, Jalen McMillan and Rome Odunze are both possibly coming back as well. They have the defensive Braylon Trice announced that he's coming back to school. Jeremiah Martin's coming back. Zion.
Is anybody opting out for them this game?
I don't think so.
I don't know of anybody significant that's opting out for Washington this game. Ryan, you nailed that. That is complete buy-in.
Yes.
To what he's doing.
Not only just for this game, but they buy into what the team can accomplish in 2023. And I think that Washington is going to view this as kind of their statement going into the offseason. This is what we're going to do next year, guys. Like, this is us. And I think they think that they have a chance to be Pac-12 champs and fight for a playoff spot next year and maybe win a championship. I think that's – I don't think so either.
Back, Ryan, they're not wrong.
I don't think so either because they have a very talented pass rush. They have a good offensive line coming back, and then they'll have all their pass game weapons coming back as well. So if all of them can stay healthy, I believe that they can be a very good team next year. So you look at this football game, I ended up predicting 31-27, which is a little closer than maybe people are like, what, you just, kind of put down Texas and kind of talked up Washington. It's more about the fact that Texas always has talents, right? Even without Bijan Robinson, Roschon Johnson, they are still going to have players. Xavier Worthy is incredibly talented. Jatavion Sanders is incredibly talented. Keelan Robinson is still a quality back that was at Alabama before he was at Texas, right? So they still have players, which I think that they'll be able to keep this game close. Ultimately, though, I'm going to pick the team that I believe is bought in more, that has more guys that have been stalwarts on this team throughout the entirety of the season on the offensive and defensive side of this game. So give me Washington 31-27. I think Texas fights hard, but ultimately I just think Washington has more firepower in this one.
Question, Ryan, is Xavier Worthy playing? He's playing in this game,
I believe
correct?
so.
Yeah,
I believe so.
I tried looking that up, and I couldn't see anything about him opting out. I went 38-27, so we're a touchdown off. We had some interesting ones. Vince picked Texas to win 31-24. Sean Davis predicted Washington to win 31-28. Sean Stiers predicted Texas to win 42-38. And Andrew McDonough me and Andrew McDonough are the two that picked double-digit wins. He went 44-30 in favor of Washington. So for me, Ryan, when I look at this game, it comes down to the reason I went 38-27, even though I think that Washington will win somewhat convincingly. I do think Quinn Ewers and I always want to come Jarrell Worthy. I've been screwing up names this week so bad.
Former Packer great Jarrell Worthy.
Yeah, Michigan State defensive tackle, right? Like Xavier Worthy. I think they're going to connect on a couple big plays. I think they're going to hit some big plays. I don't think Texas is going to consistently move the football, but this is not a great Washington secondary. They're susceptible to getting ripped up a little bit in the pass game. And I don't think that Ewers is necessarily going to have a consistent 4-quarter dominant game. If he does, then this is going to be a much higher scoring affair.
Yes,
but I do think he's going to hit a couple bombs. I do, or at least kind of hit Xavier Worthy on a drag where he outruns the defense. So I think we'll see some big plays out of Texas, which keeps it close. But I don't think they're going to be able to run the football the way that they have. And here's the scary thing for Texas: Washington figured out how to run the football late in the year, and that was a team that didn't really run the football that well, Ryan. They had during the regular season. If you look at Washington, they had a 241-yard output against Portland State. The rest of their games against FBS opponents was 132 yards against Kent, 106 against Michigan State, 169 against Stanford, 71 against UCLA, 134 against ASU, 79 against Arizona, 102 against Cal, 100 against Oregon, and 100 against Oregon State, and then 114 against Oregon. Then they come out and they go for 280 against Colorado, and you're like, well, that doesn't matter. Colorado's terrible, and they are terrible. But then they came out and went for 218 against Washington State. Washington State was a team that coming in that game had only given up over 100 yards rushing in 5 of their previous 11 games and only given up over 200 yards rushing once all year. And
Washington State's a quality defense.
Exactly. And they went for 218 in that game. And you're like, hold on a second. If this team starts running the football, no chance. I mean, you've got no chance. And so that to me is what's going to make this game really dangerous, really, really dangerous for them. They found a really nice combo with Cameron Davis and Wayne Tuilopapa. I think this is a game where Washington could really roll, and I think they'll be clearly the better team. I think it'll be a little bit closer because of some of the big plays that we're going to see from the Texas pass game.
Yep.
So Ryan, those are tonight's games. There's some really entertaining. There's more entertaining games coming up, and one of the games is being played the same day as Notre Dame, so that'll be tomorrow night. Is the Clemson-Tennessee game, and this game really fascinates me in a lot of ways, Ryan, because honestly, these teams are going to look really different than what they did during the regular season. And you and I were talking about this last night. The game is tomorrow night at 8:00 on ESPN. It is the Orange Bowl. Now, this is a great storyline. This is the fun part of this. It's the Orange Bowl between Tennessee and Clemson. I mean, could you have a better pairing in the Orange Bowl than Tennessee and Clemson? No, you cannot, is the answer. Both of these teams finished in the top 10. Tennessee finished the year ranked 6th. Clemson finished the year ranked 7th. But you're going to have brand new quarterbacks for both teams, sort of, right? I mean, Joe Milton did start the last, 2 games of the year, or at least last game of the year against Vanderbilt. They look so, I mean, they ran the ball down Vanderbilt's throat. I don't even think they even threw for 200 yards. This is a team that just ripped everybody up throwing the football throughout the year. Looked way different. You have Joe Milton, a quarterback, and he's not going to have Cedric Tillman or Jalen Hyatt. You've got a Clemson team where DJ Uiagalelei is now off to Oregon State. I think I finally got it right, and it actually sounded somewhat normal. You're not going to have Miles Murphy. You're not going to have Trenton Simpson. So these teams are going to look a whole lot different, Ryan. And I mean, it's really a game where you're talking about two teams that are sort of it's kind of a let's prepare for next year type of game. But I think this is an important game for these two teams. I'm disappointed with all the opt-outs just because I would have loved to have seen these two teams healthy. But I do think for Clemson, the opt-outs favor them a little bit more because they're still loaded on the defensive line. And I think they should have moved on to – I don't think Dabo would have benched DJ to start this game. I think he still would have started DJ. There's a loyalty with Dabo that sometimes, just I appreciate it. The fact that he waited as long as he did to move on from Kelly Bryant to Trevor Lawrence shows the loyalty he has. I mean, that should have happened in fall camp. What I mean? But with Klubnik now, I think this offense has a much better chance of looking like it should look. I'm not a big fan of Brandon Streeter. I've never been a big fan of the Clemson offense from a play calling standpoint. They've always just had great players and really, really good quarterbacks. And I think Klubnik is going to get them back to that because you're going to have a legitimate throwing weapon now, in my opinion, that's going to take some of the burden off of the run game. And it's going against a defense that's just flat out not good. So to me, I give Clemson the advantage there. For Tennessee, look, they're still talented. It's just with Tennessee, what I don't know, Ryan, is do they want to be here or not? This is a team that failed to show up late in the year with a playoff on the line against South Carolina. And we're hearing stories about one of their linebackers being envious of the attention that their quarterback is getting, and it creates a locker room fight, and you don't show up against South Carolina. This team is I don't know where this team is going to be. I don't know where the headspace is going to be, and that's what makes this game hard to predict even beyond just the opt-outs. So that's the storyline for this game, Ryan. Vince D'Addario predicted Clemson to win 28-27. Sean Davis predicted Clemson to win 27-23. Sean Stiers predicted Tennessee to win 34-30. And Andrew McDonough went with a low-scoring game. Clemson 21, Tennessee 16. Ryan, what is your prediction, and how do you see this game playing out?
Yeah, I picked Clemson 28-24 in this one over Tennessee, and you hit on a lot of the reasons, Brian. We're working through this list of games, I've realized that a lot of my predictions are kind of based upon how bought in I think that teams are to be in these football games, and I think that you have to be in the age that we're in with these bowl games of so many opt-outs. I know that you mentioned that there's a couple on Clemson's side, but one thing I think there's a lot of shade that's thrown at Dabo Swinney, but with the program that he has built and the success they've had, they've always been pretty bought in, right? Like they buy into what Dabo has kind of built there in South Carolina at the University of Clemson. So I think Clemson's going to be ready to play. Tennessee, I'm not as sold on being ready to play in this football game. And it's nothing against Josh Heupel. It's nothing about what he's building, because I think he's doing a really nice job. It's just I think you're seeing with the opt-outs. I mean, first and foremost, you don't have Hendon Hooker again in this game after getting hurt a couple games ago during the South Carolina game. I'm not a big fan of Joe Milton. Never have been. I think that the team kind of had to transform a little bit down the stretch, and it worked, but you're playing against a much better defense. Exactly. Yeah. You're playing against a much better run defense than Vanderbilt in this game. You're going against a really staunch defense in Clemson, even without Miles Murphy, even without Trenton Simpson. They still have guys like Barrett Carter and Brian Bresee and KJ Henry, and they still got a bunch of guys that are going to play football in the NFL, right? So you still have them going against a much better defense, and you don't have Jalen Hyatt. You don't have Cedric Tillman. I just don't know if the passing game is going to be balanced enough against a quality Clemson defense to just run down their throats. I just don't think that's going to happen, although I know Notre Dame fans are thinking, but Notre Dame did it, but it's a one-game admiration, I think, a little bit.
Well, and Notre Dame's a different animal than Tennessee.
Yes.
Tennessee 100%. Doesn't have the Notre Dame offensive line or Notre Dame running backs.
Agree.
And so, no, it's not going to work. And here's nothing. I don't think it works as well if Cade Klubnik is the starter from beginning to end. I think it would have been a more competitive game. Now, they threw him into a bad situation, Ryan, and he threw the bad pick. But if he was the starter, I think it would have looked different. I think Notre Dame still wins, but it would have looked different, in my opinion.
And I think it's a great little segue there too, Brian, because the last piece was about Cade Klubnik for me, right? And it's more simply this. When you compare the quarterbacks in this football game, Cade Klubnik showed me a lot more in the last game he played than what Joe Milton has shown me from a passing perspective over the last couple of games that he's had to play.
Or his entire career.
Yes. So I'll take the passing edge. I'll give it to Clemson's quarterback in this regard. I think that I'm not sold on how Tennessee's going to buy into playing in this football game, and I don't think they're going to be able to run the football as effectively as they have down the stretch without Hendon Hooker. So give me Clemson 28-24. Still think Tennessee makes a couple plays. Brew McCoy, Jabari Small, a couple solid running backs, but I still think that Clemson is able to win a tight, highly contested game in this one.
Archer made this comment. He said that if Hendon Hooker was playing, he'd take Tennessee, and I would too. If Hendon Hooker was playing, and even without the two receivers, they rip up that Clemson secondary. It's not a good secondary, and that's why. Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say, and if Hendon Hooker does play in this football game, if he's available and he chooses to play, both the receivers probably end up playing in this football game.
At least one of them might.
Yeah,
I think Tillman still might have opted out just because of the injuries.
Sure.
And that would have made sense to me. But maybe Hyatt plays in this game if he plays. But even if he doesn't, I still think they rip up that Clemson secondary. It's just not good. And now you're putting pressure on Cade Klubnik to have to score to keep up, and that's a lot to put on a freshman. But I look at it, Ryan, and I see it as a game that I just think that I don't see Tennessee stopping this Clemson offense. And it's not even a great Clemson offense. It's a talented Clemson offense. They're still not coached very well, in my opinion. But the offensive line was solid this year. It was solid. It was a traditional Clemson offensive line, not a traditional Clemson skill set. And it really comes down to the fact that they couldn't get the ball out to their receivers. They're not great receivers, but all of a sudden those receivers looked a whole lot better as soon as Cade Klubnik got put into that game. That's not a coincidence, right? Because he's accurate. He can get the ball where it needs to go. Now, as I've always said, Ryan, it's a lot easier to be a effective quarterback when you're coming off the bench as opposed to when you're, a guy. You've got to be the guy. Right. But Cade Klubnik, to me, has been playing in front of the spotlight for years. I mean, he played at one of the biggest high schools in the state of Texas. That long stretch of games they never lost. Well, he was a primary reason for that. He went at his last high school game. He absolutely ripped up the Denton Geyer defense with Peyton Bowen and Ryan Yates and Eli Bowen and all those kind of guys. Right. And so he's a guy that I think is going to handle the pressure well. I don't think you choose to go to Clemson if you're not going to handle the pressure well. And when he came into that game, it just completely turned around. All of a sudden, the tight ends look better. All of a sudden, the receivers look better. And all of a sudden, this looks like a competent offense. And I think, did you ever look at the stat line of that game, Ryan? It was insane. 15 different players caught passes in that game.
It's wild.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah.
Typically, it's like 7 players catch a pass or so.
Right. Now, some of them caught passes from the backups because, like, Hunter Johnson played. And one of the 15 players that catch a pass in that game was Cade Klubnik, right? So not only does he go 20 of 24 for 279 yards passing, but he rushed the ball 7 times for 30 yards and a touchdown, and he caught a pass for 19 yards. So he's a much more natural football player than DJ. So I think that's really what it comes down to. I think he's going to hit some passes early against a really bad Tennessee secondary. That's going to soften up the Tennessee defense. And then second, it's going to look a lot like, to me, the Notre Dame game, Ryan, in that the pass game is going to be key early. That's going to open things up for the run game. And the second half is going to be about Will Shipley and Phil Maffa just running it down Tennessee's throat. And then when Tennessee loads the box, over the top to Bo Collins or Cole Turner or one of the tight ends. So I think this game's not going to be overly competitive, in my opinion.
Great.
So Ryan, there's a couple other big games, or a couple other the games we'll talk about a little bit. I don't want to get into them too much because they're still down the road. The Rose Bowl, Utah and Penn State. Just quickly give our predictions for those games, Ryan, and then the Cotton Bowl with Tulane and USC. I don't care to talk much about. That's going to be an ugly game. We saw what happened. Look what happened to UCF, the runner-up in the AAC. Look what happened to them. And Cincinnati was the number 3 team in the AAC. Look what happened to them. They got rolled by Louisville.
They did.
Louisville threw for under 100 yards, I believe, in that game, and still smacked Cincinnati. UCF just got destroyed by Duke yesterday. The AAC stinks. And I love Tulane and the story and all that stuff. They're going to get rolled by USC. I don't see this USC team showing up like they don't want to be here. We've seen very few opt-outs at USC, right? Mm-hmm. And they're going to be ready to play. Jordan Addison's not playing, right? But, that's a position where they're totally fine missing a guy.
Yeah,
I don't think this game's going to be overly close, Ryan. So my prediction for the game was I'm pulling up because we'll have a prediction article coming out. We just haven't published it yet. But my prediction is 41-24, and it may not even be that close. and I know yours was a little closer than mine, but why do you had 35-24, Ryan?
Yes.
Do you see it being a competitive game?
No, mine's 35-24, where Tulane scores a late touchdown or touchdown field goal late in the game, and it makes it look a little more respectable. I think for me, I my prediction I think that USC might sleepwalk through the first quarter or so, and it might be like a little bit of a tightly contested game. But as soon as Caleb Williams and those guys get going, you know what I mean? I just don't think that Tulane has just don't think they have the guys to cover the Jordan Addisons of the world, even if he's not playing. Taj Washington, the talented receivers that they have. I just think that USC has too much firepower. So I think it's a lopsided game where Tulane scores one late to make it look a little more competitive than it was.
And I actually think they can run the ball on USC. Tyjae Spears is really good. The problem is I just don't think they have any shot at stopping USC, and it's going to be quickly 21-7, and they can't just keep running the football, right? And Tulane has a really talented quarterback and a really talented running back and an offensive line that's playing better. Nice foundation laid there by Chris Watt, by the way. So just want to get that out there. But I just don't think it's going to be a close enough game for them to do it. And they do not have the playmakers on the perimeter for this to be to make plays on USC, in my opinion. No.
I mean, they have a great duo of receivers named Deuce Watts and Fat Watts. That's fantastic names.
No, the names are great. The names are great. Yeah.
But I like your mention of Tyjae Spears, though. He's going to the Senior Bowl. He's had a really nice season at running back, on top of having Michael Pratt, obviously, in this football game. Like I said, I think that they'll be able to, be respectable offensively. I think they'll score a couple touchdowns, especially late in this game. But ultimately, I just don't think that defensively Tulane has the dudes to cover this USC team in long stretches. I don't think they have the defensive linemen. I know Darius Hodges is a pretty good defensive end, but I don't think they have the defensive linemen in general that are going to be happy or conditioned to chase around Caleb Williams all day. I just don't think that's in their best cards.
Ryan, if people out there, if you don't know who Tyjae Spears is, go watch the AAC championship game. And
good football player, man.
Just watch it. He's really good. There's no doubt. Rose Bowl, Ryan, Utah against Penn State. Just briefly, that'll be I think both of those games are going to be played on January 2nd, so they're still several days away. I think this is going to be an interesting game. Vince predicted a blowout. Everybody else predicted a pretty close game. Everybody has Utah winning. All of us have Utah winning, but we all have Utah winning in a close game. I think the thing that hurts Penn State is if Parker Washington and Joey Porter played, they may have a shot to win this game.
Yes,
but I think those two guys opting out, it's now you're saying, okay, basically it's going to be up to Sean Clifford to win this game.
I think I think I saw yesterday that Brenton Strange just declared for the draft too, so I don't know if he's going to be playing in this full game or not.
That's
so
not good.
Yeah. I mean, I had 27-24 in this one in favor of Utah, mostly because of what you said, Brian. Like, I think that Utah is going to have more of their dudes in this football game,
right? And
I just haven't been. Like, Penn State's always going to be a talented team. There's no doubt. Like, they have guys, right? Because they recruit at a high level. Like, there's always going to be talent in that room. Right. They just haven't impressed me overly this year. I mean, they haven't beaten a ton of quality opponents at this point. They haven't really beaten a quality opponent just in general most of the year. So playing against a quality Utah team that is pretty fundamentally sound, and I think will want to be there a little bit. Just give me Utah in a close one, because I don't think that Utah has – like, it's not like I think that Penn State probably has more talent than Utah. I just think Utah is a little bit more bought in, a little more physically of an opposing team. So I think that they will adapt to Kyle Whittingham's personality in this one, and they'll win a tight game, because I just think that they'll be mentally prepared for this.
Because I think the only two guys opting out for them are Kincaid, because the injuries, and then Sean Clark Phillips, right? But the thing is, with Parker Washington opting out, I don't know if Penn State has the pass game to take advantage of that. Like Lambert's a nice player, and I'm forgetting the name of the other third receiver. They had a decent receiving core this year, but Parker Washington was the weapon, was the threat. And look, they showed against USC that if Dalton Kincaid can go down, and they're fine. I mean, they didn't miss a beat.
Their backup tight end, whose name I can't remember right now, he's a quality kid, man. He's averaging 20 yards a catch this year, over 300 yards. So they have dudes in that tight end room still.
Right. And I mean, Dalton Kincaid's a nice player, but in my opinion, I've said this before, I think he was more of a product of that's a good tight end system. You know what I mean? And that's, to me, where it kind of comes down to. They'll be fine there. They'll be fine. So I went 27-20. I think it'll be kind of a boring game, to be completely honest with you. It's not looking forward to it. Now there's a couple other games being played, Ryan, that are going to be less boring. And those are the well, actually, let's quickly get to the I forgot the Sugar Bowl before we get to the playoff games. Let's talk about the Sugar Bowl a little bit, Ryan. Number 5 Bama against number 9 Kansas State. I honestly thought a week ago that Kansas State was going to have a chance to win this game because I did not at all anticipate Bryce Young and Will Anderson playing. And look, Kansas State can beat Alabama with Jalen Milroe. But two things about this now. I now don't think it's going to be a competitive game, right? I'm going 31-17 because here's the way I look at it. My concern with Bama all year has been two things. Number one, I think their coordinators are below average, right? Just I've been on this since the summer, and it got proved out this year. And number two, you question the buy-in at Bama this year. And there's been even internally, there's been discussions about how NIL is changing the culture of the team and all these other type of things, right? The fact that your two dudes opted to play in this game with no championship on the line, I have a hard time seeing the buy-in being an issue now. Because it's kind of like, hey, I'm playing in this game, and I promise you I'm getting picked higher than you this year. And that's Will Anderson and Bryce Young can both say that. That was a statement to me that I was not expecting to see be sent by Alabama's leaders. And so I see Bama showing up in this game. Now, K-State's got a really good defense. Best defense in the Big 12, in my opinion. And Alabama will hit some plays, but I don't think Alabama's going to score like 50 on them. I don't see that, but I also don't think it's going to be competitive because with Bryce Young, I can see 31 to 37 points by Bama, and I don't think Will Howard and this K-State offense can keep up. I love Deuce Vaughn. He's a special player, Ryan, but I just don't see a scenario in which without – with Bryce Young and Will Anderson playing, I don't see a scenario where they can protect him enough, Will Howard enough, and if Will Howard's good enough to make enough plays on the perimeter to keep up in this game. I don't see it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm a little more positive. I don't want to say positive, but I have a little more of an expectation that Kansas State's going to come and play in this football game. And I know you mentioned with Bryce Young and Will Anderson playing in this game, it appears that Alabama is completely bought in, but I still have some reservations about them coming in this football game just because I think that Kansas State is going to look at the team across from them and say, like, that's Alabama. We need to play our best game, right? And I still think there's going to be something in the back of some Alabama's players' minds of, like, it's a Big 12 team, like that's Kansas State, like it's not even one of the big names in the Big 12, right? And I think that there's going to be maybe a little bit of taking a team for granted a little bit during this football game early on. And I think that this at halftime, I wouldn't be shocked if this was like a 14-13 game. Alabama's winning. And then in the second half, I think that that's when Alabama separates themselves a little bit. So I had it 28-20, but that's a 28-20 where I think it's like 14-13 at halftime. Alabama eventually gets up like 28-13, and then Kansas State knocks one in with like a minute left. You know what I mean? Where it's like, at the precipice of this game, when the game mattered most, Alabama was winning by 2 scores and their defense was playing a good football game, right? So I think that they are going to separate themselves, but I think Kansas State's just one of those pesky teams that will stay in the game even if they ultimately don't win.
I have a 31-17, similar fashion. I just don't think they can score enough to win.
That's fair.
I just don't. Now, I don't think, like I said, I don't think Bama's going to rip them up because, number one, Bama doesn't have a great receiving core. They don't run the ball all that great. And their offensive line was just kind of okay. And I don't think their coordinator's that good. But they've got a special kid at quarterback. And I just don't think that K-State has the firepower to stay up in this game. And so I don't if they get to 20-24, I think it's a late score situation. And this, like you said, this is a really well-coached, fundamentally sound, tough football team. They will not be afraid of Bama. They will not back down from Bama. But I just don't think they have the horses to play with Bama, a motivated Bama. And I think this is going to be a motivated Bama. Now, motivated to go out and play like they're playing for a title? No, but just to go out there and play, just to want to be there. I don't think that happens. I don't think that happens if Bryce Young doesn't play, even if Will Anderson played, if Bryce Young doesn't play, I'm picking Kansas State flat out. And that tells you that I think Kansas State can be they deserve to be on the field, Bama. I just think at the end of the day, if it comes down to Bryce Young versus Will Howard, for all the nice things he's done this year, it's just not happening. It's just not happening. let's dive into the college football playoff, Ryan, because people are going to lose their minds when we go through these predictions for these two games. I'm actually very I have not been super fired up about the last few playoffs. I just think the matchups have been bad. We kind of knew who was going to win. You kind of knew it was going to be Georgia, and like last year might have been the worst playoff pairings ever. Like you knew who was going to be in the championship game as soon as they laid the pairings out. You knew it was going to be Bama and Georgia. Just I just honestly watched those games just passively while we had a little IB get together in Phoenix on the day of the playoff, and I barely watched. I went back and watched a little bit of them later just to break the games down, but like it were just boring games. And I am very intrigued by this year's games. I think these are much better games than a lot of people are giving them credit for. I think people are just kind of, it's going to be Georgia and Michigan. Let's see what's going to happen there. I think these are going to be two very entertaining games. I want to begin, Ryan, with the Fiesta Bowl. That's going to be, and we're going to go in order of when the games are played. So the number 2 Michigan Wolverines against the number 3 TCU Horned Frogs. Michigan is 13-0. TCU is 12-1. TCU finished the regular season undefeated, but then lost the Big 12 title game to Kansas State, who we talked about earlier in a rematch game. Michigan we talked about Florida State being one of the hottest teams coming down the stretch. Michigan might be the hottest team coming down the stretch. Just the way they played in their last couple games. They did to Purdue and Ohio State what South Carolina did to Tennessee and Clemson. Purdue hung with them for a little bit, which I think is relevant to this matchup, but Michigan was clearly the better team that game. Ohio State hung with them for a half, but Michigan just dominated the second half. That was kind of how the Penn State game went. That's how the Rutgers game went. Michigan has been a team that has just not been a great out of the gate, but once they get rolling, they roll people in the second half. And they come in with a 2 seed. Obviously, they played last year, was their first playoff appearance. They got smacked by Georgia. This is a more, I want to say, a team that matches up a little bit better in their first round game than they did the first round game last year. So game is Michigan's 7.5-point favorite. And honestly, I thought it would be more than that. I was a little surprised it was that. I don't think it should be more than that, but I just feel like with the disrespect that TCU gets, TCU's been a little bit of a Cinderella story this year. Ryan, would you agree with that? I think you look at them, not a lot of people are picking TCU to win it all. They came out early in the year and had wins over Colorado State, Tarleton State, a little bit of a sloppy win over SMU. And then when they kind of announced their presence with a major authority that next week over Oklahoma, when they just destroyed Oklahoma in a night game. Now, at the time, we thought Oklahoma was still a decent team, right? We didn't know that. And that was kind of their breakout game. And then the rest of the year, they kept playing tough games. And it seemed like after teams played them, the teams plummeted. And I don't know why, but like Oklahoma State went down after that win. Kansas went down after that win by TCU. And it just kind of, it's like, I don't know what it was. It just kind of like was the death knell. And they showed that they can win gritty games. They showed they can win shootouts. And, they weren't a dominant team, but they were a team that just showed they know how to win. Will that matter? How will that stack up against Michigan? We'll find out, Ryan. But I think this is going to be a lot more competitive game than a lot of people seem to think this game will be. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this matchup.
Yeah, I think that ultimately, look, man, I really want to believe in this TCU team, Brian. I do, because they're fun, man. Like you said, they're a Cinderella story. They have
writing them off all year, man.
I was.
You predict them to lose almost every time we did a TCU game. You'd predict them to lose.
When I predicted them to win was the Big 12 championship game. Yeah, that happens. Yeah.
That's part of the reason I think they're going to beat Michigan is because you're predicting them to lose. So
I guess that could be possible if we're talking about the trends of things. I guess it's possible. But again, you look at Max Duggan, who wasn't even the starting quarterback to start the year, and then he's a Heisman Trophy finalist and is a Senior Bowl participant. Talk about the first year under Sonny Dykes and what he's been able to do with that passing offense, that offense in general, with Kendre Miller running the ball, Quentin Johnston catching the football. Ultimately, though, I think the separator for me is that TCU's defense is not what you typically think of a TCU defense, right? Like it's got holes in it. And I think that this Michigan offense is going to be able to wear down on them a little bit. I do in this football game. I want to believe in TCU, but even the things TCU does really well, creating explosive plays in the passing game, I think Michigan does a nice job of taking those explosive plays away as well, right? Like they don't let up a ton of explosives. They usually are a pretty fundamentally sound defensive football team. So I picked Michigan painfully to win 35-24. I think if anybody knows me, I do not pick Michigan to win off.
See, that's how bad it is.
Just
Ryan
the football team. I think
Michigan
they end up winning this
microphone
one.
just goes out. That's what happens. Your microphones start going out when you start talking about Michigan winning, and that's just kind of how bad it is. Look, I was not a believer. Michigan was for me what TCU was for you. I was not a believer all year. I watched them play, and they'd blow this team out, but they didn't impress me. They didn't, people say, oh, this is better than last year's team. Like, no, they're not. They don't have the talent last year's team had, and they just kept winning and winning and winning, and then they'd fall behind Penn State and win in a blowout. They'd fall behind Rutgers and win in a blowout, and I'm like, Ohio State's going to expose them, and nope, didn't happen. And I still have some questions about them, right? A little bit, because I thought that Ohio State game said a lot, as much about Ohio State as it did Michigan. But you got to give it to Michigan, because this is not as talented as last year's team. But this is, you talk about knowing who you are. There's not a team in the country that knows who they are better than Michigan. They know this is what we're good at, and this is what we're not good at. And we're going to steer right into the things that we're good at. And we're not going to try to force the things we're not good at into the game for some reason. And, this is going to hurt to say it, but like, I enjoyed watching Michigan this year from a former coach's standpoint, because you're like, this is a team that says you're going to have to beat us, because we're not beating ourselves. We're going to play sound football. We're going to play physical football. We're going to play smart football. And we're just going to go out there and play our game. And, I was impressed by how they played. Now, I still don't think they're super talented. I still don't think I think the Big Ten stinks this year, to be completely honest with you. I think that there's a lot of those things, but look, you cannot deny the consistency with which Michigan played the game this season. And there was no bad week for them. You kept waiting for it. This is the week that they don't. Everybody else had a bad week. Everybody else. TCU had one. Georgia had one. Georgia almost lost to Missouri. There was no game like that for Michigan, in my opinion. And so that impressed me, Ryan. It really did. Now, TCU, to me, is a much more battle-tested team, in my view. They are much more battle-tested. I guess you could point to Illinois as maybe being a Missouri game, but Illinois is a good football team, in my opinion. So I think that's probably a good example for the Missouri game. But when I look at it, though, Ryan, I still think football is a game of matchups. And there's two matchups that are going to determine this game one way or the other. One is TCU's run defense against Michigan's rush offense, right? Like, that's a big one. Michigan ran the ball so exceptionally well this season. Won their second straight Joe Moore Award, and did so without Blake Corum. Blake Corum, their best, who I think would have been a Heisman finalist if he doesn't get hurt before the Ohio State game. If he goes out there and he puts up the yards that Donovan Edwards put up against Ohio State, he's a Heisman finalist, in my opinion. He was, to me, arguably the best running back in the country this year, him and Bijan Robinson, from a production standpoint. Not an NFL draft or whatever talent standpoint, but just production standpoint. And then he goes down, and what do they do against Ohio State? Just keep doing what they're doing. Again, because it wasn't about the back, it's about the line and what we believe in. And then Donovan Edwards goes out there and rips them up, right? And then they go into the Big Ten title game, and you're like, well, maybe they've got some film on Michigan now. Nope, didn't matter. Donovan Edwards goes out there again and rips up Purdue, who had a pretty decent run defense this year. Ryan, would you agree with that? They were not a terrible run defense this season by any stretch of the imagination. Mm-hmm. And then you've got TCU on the other side, and TCU's rush defense this season has been okay at times, and has struggled at other times. And they really wore down late in the season, in my opinion. Gave up 195 to Texas Tech, gave up 232 to Baylor, gave up 205 in the title game to Kansas State. But here's why I think this may not be the advantage, could potentially not be the advantage that you'd think it would on paper. TCU going to that bowl game, Ryan, you watched, Dugan was tapped out. Their defense was tapped out. They had played so many four-quarter games where they had to come from behind that I just thought by the time they got the Big 12 title game, they were tapped out. They were just out of energy. They just had no juice left. Well, now you've had a month off to kind of rest and recover and get right. I think you're going to see a TCU defense that flies around the field a lot more. And I think you've had a month to kind of prepare for some of the different things that Michigan does. So I think TCU could do enough to create enough stops to where you're going to have to get J.J. McCarthy to do something to beat you in this game, which Ohio State tried to do that, and J.J. beat him. He made the plays to beat him, right? I think this TCU defense is going to be a little bit better prepared for Michigan than Ohio State was, which is a weird thing to say. But I think TCU has a chance to stay in this game. But here's the piece for me. Here's what it comes down to, because you picked your score was what, Ryan? Did you say what your score was?
35-24 Michigan.
I'm going 30-24 TCU.
Okay.
Because here's the thing for me. I still don't believe that Michigan's secondary is actually that good. I think Ohio State's issues against them were more about an unwillingness to throw the ball down the field as opposed to a ability. I mean, they took two deep. They went two. CJ Stroud went 2 of 3 on downfield shots for like 80-some yards, right? Like when teams are willing to throw downfield on Michigan, they have success. It's just not many teams have the ability or willingness, because we've talked about this before. Ohio State is not a huge vertically pass-oriented team. They're a quick, short, intermediate type of team. And the unwillingness of CJ Stroud to hit guys that I thought were open down the field, or at least in one-on-ones, was there. And this is going to be as arguably as explosive of a receiving core as they faced all season. They are not as good of receivers as Ohio State's. Do not confuse what I'm saying here. Marvin Harrison is better than anybody TCU has, and Emeka Egbuka is a pretty darn good player as well. But from a sheer speed standpoint, this is going to be the fastest receiving core that Michigan will have faced this year, in my opinion. And now you've given Garrett Riley and Sonny Dykes, who I think are 2 really good offensive minds, especially Sonny Dykes, a month to prepare for this game. I think you're going to see them kind of come out and hit some shots. And I think ultimately that's going to be the difference in this game, is they're going to be able to take enough pressure off of Max Duggan with some of those, or off their defense with some of those shots. They're going to allow them to win the game. Could I see Michigan winning? Yeah, absolutely. Michigan's a good football team. I'm picking an upset here, and I think it's going to be because they're going to hit those downfield shots. I think that's going to ultimately be the difference in the game, and Michigan's just not going to have enough firepower throwing the football to win this game. And I think that, now that you've had a month to prepare what a Michigan offense looks like without Blake Corum, this is the first time you see them really suffer a little bit by not having Blake Corum. These months off, to me, are huge for teams. Huge for teams. And I think it's going to benefit TCU. I think I'll say this: if the playoff and the championship would have been played the week after the conference title games, and then the championships a week after that, I think Michigan wins it all. I think Michigan was playing that well down the stretch, and teams just weren't able to get a read because they did some different things late with Donovan Edwards. I mean, I think Michigan was hot coming in down stretch. I don't think that in this instance, I think the layoff is not going to benefit them, in my view. I think it's going to benefit TCU. So that's why I'm making the prediction that I am. I'm predicting TCU to beat Michigan. What do you say about that, Ryan? You think I'm nuts? Questioning your
not nuts. Nuts isn't the right word. I mean, again, I think that people have counted out TCU all year, including myself, right? And they continue to kind of shock us with their ability to rise to the biggest occasion in the fourth quarter. I just think that Michigan's just a little bit of a different quality of opponent than some of the teams that they've been able to come back on and beat in the fourth quarter. So It pains me, man. It pains me. I do not want to pick Michigan. I want to pick TCU right now.
I agree with you on that, Ryan. I don't think they can come back and beat Michigan. I don't. If Michigan jumps up on TCU, they're going to win, and I think they're going to win going away. I actually see this as the opposite. I think TCU jumps on Michigan early, and then Michigan's got to try to battle back. That's actually how I see this game playing out. I don't think TCU is good enough, because if Michigan gets a lead, they're just going to run that clock down, man, and they're just going to run the ball, and they're going to force you to put 8-9 in the box, and the next thing you know, JJ's going to do some kind of bootleg throwback thing over your head, and it's going to a tight end or a running back, and it's going to put the game away. Right? Like, I don't think they can come back on Michigan. My prediction is built on TCU jumping ahead and holding off Michigan at the end. Is kind of where I see it. And so, as I envision this game playing out, I see Michigan getting the ball back with like a minute and a half left, down 30-24, and it now is up to JJ to go make enough plays, and I just don't think he's there yet. And that's kind of the thing for me. Whereas Max Duggan is much more battle tested. Now, never in a moment like this, but neither of the quarterbacks have played in a moment like this. Sure. What Max has done is he's played a lot more football. And that's what it comes down to for me. Will I be shocked if Michigan wins it? No. I think this is a very good Michigan team. And I'm not on the whole. I'm still just not sold that they're a great. They're good. They've earned my respect. I just think this matchup is not going to be. It's not as favorable as I think a lot of people are making it seem like it's going to be, because I just don't think they've played against this kind of speed all season against a team that also is willing to throw the football down the field. And that's the biggest difference to me. Ohio State had such a passive game plan against them. I was floored, honestly, Ryan. I'm still stunned at just the utter lack of aggressiveness that Ohio State showed in that game. They took 3 shots beyond 20 yards. 3. And they hit 2 of them for 86 yards. Like, for me, Ryan, I look at this, I looked at it and I was like, I just don't understand what they were doing. I still don't understand just why they were so passive in that game. Here's the thing about TCU. You and I both know that is not going to be the case for TCU. They're not a team that just comes out and chucks it deep all year, all game, right? They're not that. But look, Max Duggan threw 68 deep balls this year. He completed 50% of them for 18 touchdowns and 3 picks. That's a team that's willing to be aggressive, and then, you look at Ohio State this year, and CJ Stroud threw only 54 deep balls for only 922 yards and 9 touchdowns. Right. That's just who Ryan Day wants to be. When you've got a guy like CJ Stroud with his arm, and you've got Marvin Harrison, the fact that you don't throw the ball deep more against the schedule you play this has been the weirdest year from Ohio State I've ever seen. And now when I get into the Ohio State Georgia stuff, you're going to be like, dude, didn't you just say, yeah, what we saw from in the regular season from Ohio State was weird, very weird. And TCU won't have similar to that, right? Antoine Johnson says, Brian, how will that 3-3-5 hold up against Michigan in your opinion? That's going to be the key, right? I mean, that's going to be the key. I don't think they're just going to kind of come up and play an off 3-3-5, right? I mean, these are good defensive coaches. They can't. Right. Now, they may stay in a 3-3-5, but what you're going to see is a lot like what Marcus Freeman used to do at Cincinnati. It's a very aggressive, stunting 3-3-5 where you're trying to create penetration. You're trying to create mistakes. You're trying to create – because one of the advantages the 3-3-5 gives, and it's not worth it enough for me to go with it as my base defense unless I have just studs up front. But one of the advantages is, as an offense, it can be hard sometimes if you've got a really good 3-3 team that's really good at timing their stunts and twists, because that stuff can create a lot of this. And so that's what you want to do. Is what you can't allow Michigan to do is come off and get a vertical push against your 3-3-5. If they do that, you're done. But if you can really hit them with a lot of twists and you're moving your backers up and you're moving them all around, then what happens is all of a sudden Michigan's got to be worrying about a lot of those twists and stunts, and they can't just come and play vertical football. That's how you've seen some of these 3-3-5 teams actually be good against the run. Marcus Freeman's 3-3-5 at Cincinnati was very good against the run. And it's because they had really aggressive linebacker play where they may have only had 3 down linemen, but they were constantly had 5 and 6 inserting into the run game. And so that's the method. Now, will that work? That's a different question. I can explain to you how it'll work, but explaining it and then executing it against this Michigan offensive line is 2 completely different animals, Ryan. Yeah. But Antoine, that's the thing is, if TCU played Georgia and Michigan had a rematch against Ohio State, hypothetically, and Michigan beat one and then TCU won, I would not be as optimistic about TCU winning a game in the title game where there's much less time to prepare. That's the thing, is that's what's all factoring into my decision to go with TCU is they're going to have a whole month to think of all these run stunts that they want to throw at Michigan, as opposed to only having 8-9 days in the title game. That matters to me. It matters to me. So again, this is not a shot. This is just how I see the matchup. Ryan obviously sees it different. I think Ryan sees it as the run that they aren't going to be able to stop the run game with a 3-3-5. I think it's kind of part of the deal. And then it comes down to, Michigan being a really fundamentally sound football team that's going to make TCU methodically go down the field. That's kind of how I'm saying it, right? Like, you don't think they're going to be able to give up the big shots. I think that's the two things that's the biggest thing we disagree on is I think they will be able to create some big shots. If I'm wrong and they're not, then TCU has no chance. They are not going to be able to consistently move the ball up and down the field against Michigan without big plays. No chance. No chance.
Yeah. I'm interested to see what the TCU defense looks like against Michigan, man, because, I mean, Antoine, it's a great question because it is kind of polar opposites of what you're built on, right? I mean, I can sit here and tell you because they have Joe Gillespie as their defensive coordinator who used to be at Tulsa. I think he's a really sharp defensive guy, but I also think that it's his first year there, right? Like the cupboard's a little bare up front, especially. Like I think Dee Winters is a pretty good linebacker that they have at middle linebacker. I think that number 52, their freshman defensive tackle, is a promising player that will be good in the future, but ultimately, I just don't think that they have the horses on the first and second level to consistently stop the running game. We'll see. I mean, 3-3-5, we could say 3-3-5, but to Brian's point, I agree 100%. You're not just going to stay in a 3-man front all game, right? Like you're going to have an adjustment to a 4-2 at some time in that football game. You're going to walk 2 up and have a 5-man front at times. Like there's adjustments out of a 3-3-5. You're not going to play just a 3-3 stack all game. Like that's not going to be your assumption. It's just, I just don't know if TCU defensively has the guys on the first and second level to play against the Joe Moore winning offensive line. I don't know if
they earned it. Guys. There's no controversy about that. My only issues with the Joe Moore Award were Notre Dame should have been in the top 10 and USC should not have. That was my thing. There was no doubt, especially the way they played in the 2 biggest games of the year. There was no doubt they earned that award. There's no doubt. Now, last year was more debatable that they should have won it last year than this year. There's no question. Let's move over to the Peach Bowl, Ryan, and this is going to be fascinating to me. You've got number 1 Georgia, the defending champs, against Ohio State, a team that, if we're being honest, backed into the playoff. They didn't earn a spot in the playoff. They were gifted a spot in the playoff because Clemson choked down the stretch, Tennessee choked down the stretch, and USC choked in the Pac-12 title game. If any of those 3 teams don't choke away games to inferior opponents, Ohio State's not in the playoff. I think we can all admit that, right? So the question is what does Ohio State do with that? I think that's the big question. I've never seen an Ohio State team just kind of blown off as much as we're seeing it with this team. I don't know of anyone that's really predicting Ohio State to win. You've got the defending champs. They're blowing people out. They're doing this. They're doing that, and they're just kind of chalking it up to who's going to be who's going to face Georgia for the title game. Ryan, I'm not sure if I'm ready to go there yet. I think this game is going to come down to, however, what Ohio State do we see? Do we see the Ohio State that we saw all year? If so, Georgia will whoop them. There's no doubt, because we saw an Ohio State team that didn't show the aggressiveness or physicality needed to be a championship football team. They got outplayed by Notre Dame for 2.5 quarters. They got outplayed by Michigan for 2.5 quarters. They could not finish against Michigan. And, I mean, honestly, they didn't really finish great against Notre Dame. It's just Notre Dame kind of couldn't do anything. It was more about Notre Dame than it was about Ohio State. If we see that team, Georgia's going to roll. But will we see the team maybe we thought we were going to see from Ohio State? Do we see Ohio State finally play to the strengths of what we believe that they are as a football team? That's going to be the interesting aspect of this. I still keep waiting on Ohio State to figure it out, and that could just be wishful thinking on my part. But I think if we get if Ohio State plays to their talent level, this is going to be a great game. A great game. If Ohio State plays the same uninspired football we saw from them all year, which was the weirdest thing to me, Ryan, then this is not going to be a very competitive game, and Georgia's going to steamroll them.
Yeah, and I mean, I ultimately think that Ohio State's going to cause Georgia some problems in the passing game early on in this football game, because I do think that this is a quality pass attack, man. I mean, we talk about it, right? CJ Stroud is a very talented quarterback. Marvin Harrison Jr. is an excellent wide receiver. Emeka Egbuka is a very talented receiver. I think that and the one thing about Georgia is, from a secondary perspective, I wasn't very inspired by what I saw against LSU. I wasn't. Even
at the beginning, Ryan, early on.
No. I mean, Jaden Daniels had 200 yards passing at halftime, right? I mean, Keely Ringo, for as talented as that kid is, like he struggles to play the ball in the air a ton, right? Like I think that secondary has some warts. I think that you can make some plays against them. So I think Ohio State has a chance to make some plays in this football game. Ultimately, though, I did pick Georgia to win 31-21. I do think it's going to be a competitive game for a large portion of the game. It's just for me, you know how I'm built. The core of me is when a team is better in the interior, working its way out, when the most important facets of the game, offensive line play, defensive line play, I'm always going to defer to that type of a football team. And I think that Georgia is a pretty even kill, just good football team consistently, right? Good, very good football team consistently. Ohio State has a lot of peaks and valleys, man. There are moments where you're like, that team looks like they're turning the corner. And then there's other times where you're just like, they just don't look physical. Like they don't look like
they don't look like they want to be out there. I mean, it's really weird. Like they did not look like they wanted to be out there against Michigan, Ryan, especially in the second half. Yep. And as soon as Michigan started hitting them a little bit, it's like, where's the fight?
And if you think Michigan's physical, I hate to break it to you, but Georgia's pretty darn physical themselves, right? Like their offensive line plays incredibly physical behind those guys. They're going to run the football. They're not as good at running the football as they have been in previous years, but Kenny McIntosh and those boys are still quality running backs. They have a really good offensive line. They have a quarterback in Stetson Bennett that just doesn't make a ton of mistakes, like I think he's a good college quarterback, man, that just doesn't make a ton of mistakes, and he has propelled his team to a couple victories this year. And defensively, I mean, that front seven, man, even after all they lost last year, I hate to tell you, they reloaded and they got some dudes up front, man. Jalen Carter's a dude. He's probably going to go top 5 in this draft. Number 10, their linebacker, whose name is escaping me. He's, I think, a sophomore, junior. That dude is a dog, man. They got some guys in that front seven that's going to make it, I think, difficult for Ohio State. If you told me that Ohio State can counter some of that physicality, I think it's going to be a really good football game. And I think it's going to go down to the wire. Ultimately, though, I think that Georgia is just stronger in the facets of the game that matter most. That's all it comes down to.
I think the thing that's probably most disappointing, if I'm looking at it from Ohio State's standpoint, is their offensive line should have been a lot better than it was. And I think, you hire Justin Fry, and he comes with this reputation of being a guy that just develops these really good rushing attacks. He did it at BC. He did it at UCLA, and they came out this year, and you have that game against Notre Dame where you really put the game away in the second half. And their run game really starts rolling here. They go for 281 against Toledo, 258 against Wisconsin, 252 against Rutgers, 237 against Michigan State, and then just fell off a map. Had some injuries at running back. Mayan Williams is banged up. Travion Henderson was banged up. He's not going to play in this game. Don't even get the 100 yards against Iowa and Penn State. Run for 207 on Northwestern in a very uninspired game. Went for 340 against Indiana. And then you were just not very good running the ball against Maryland, 160. And then against Michigan, went for 143, 4.9 yards per carry. So I think Ohio State can run the ball well enough if they play their game. This is what it all comes down to. Do they play their game? They have enough talent with DeJuan Jones, with Luke Whipple at center, who's an undersized kid but plays with great pad level, with Paris Johnson at left tackle, with Donovan Jackson at guard. The other guard position's been an issue for them all year, but Donovan Jackson's a good player. They have the talent to be able to be balanced enough to play with a team like Georgia. At the end of the day, it's all going to come down to whether or not Michigan or Ohio State can win this game. It's going to come down to two things, Ryan, for me. Number one is, do you turn C.J. Stroud loose, or do you still play the conservative, don't make a mistake, passive stuff we saw from them against Michigan? Or do you turn them loose and say, hey, look, nobody thinks we can win this game, so let's be aggressive. Let's go at them. Let's attack. And then the other part is can you make Georgia one-dimensional? That's going to be the key. Ohio State, here's what isn't getting discussed enough. Ohio State has a lot of NFL talent in their front seven. A lot. According to one draft guy, I say this is a joke, they're going to have 4 guys get picked in the first round in the 2024 NFL draft.
Just on the defensive line.
just on the defensive line. That's a joke. But there's talent there. I mean, you've got 3 NFL players at defensive end. You've got some interior guys that are going to be interior players. They have depth along the defensive line. Tommy Eichenberg's had a phenomenal year for them. Yes. There's enough talent there, in my opinion, for them to be able to try to make Georgia one-dimensional. And if Georgia's one-dimensional, they're still dangerous, but they're not as dangerous. That's going to be the key. Can Ohio State do enough against the run to make Stetson Bennett beat you? And
Right.
can you create some mistakes there? Now, the concern there is that, Georgia's not loaded at receiver, but they're good enough, and they got a great tight end. 2 really good tight ends. One great, one pretty good. So they can have success there, but they've shown they can put good game plans together against tight ends. Where they get in trouble in the pass game is on the perimeter. And I don't know if Georgia has the same kind of weapons to hurt them there. But that's the thing, is they could not make Michigan one-dimensional for the whole game. First half, they actually did a pretty decent job shutting down Michigan's run game. And lo and behold, guess what? I think they had a lead at halftime in that game, correct? But then the second half, they couldn't do it. I don't think Georgia's offense is as good running football as Michigan's. I don't think their offensive line is as good as Michigan's. It's still very good. They're very talented at running back. But I think Michigan's is better. Can Georgia do that same thing? It's not going to be cold. These Ohio State kids, because they have a lot of Southern kids on their roster. Are they going to – it's going to be indoors, right? So you're not going to have that excuse. What are we going to see from Ohio State? I think that's the question mark I have, Ryan, is I don't know what we're going to see from them. But I just have I have no – I'm not going to stand on the table and pound on the table. Well, let's give you a prediction first, Ryan. So we've kind of broken down the matchup, the do's and the don'ts. So real quick, Sean Stiers predicted 35-27 Georgia. Andrew McDonough predicted 34-21 Georgia. Sean Davis 45-27 Georgia. Vince D'Addario 37-24 Georgia. Ryan Roberts, and what is your final score prediction?
I picked 31-21 Georgia. I think that Georgia is going to be able to wear them down a little bit, especially in the second half. Again, I think that Ohio State is going to be able to create some plays in the passing game. I think that they have opportunities there. I mean, Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka, I think you're going to make some plays. Tight end's a solid football player, and Kate Stover. I think that you can make plays in the passing game. Again, I just don't think that – I think I think Georgia is stronger in the parts of the football game that matter most to deciding this game. So I think they're just going to be able to wear down on them a little bit. So give me 31-21. I think that Georgia is just a little bit too physical for Ohio State in this one.
So 31-21, you're going with Georgia beating Ohio State.
Yep.
I get it. I really do. Here's where I'm going with this one. I'm actually going Ohio State 38, Georgia 35. And it's going to be somewhat similar to the TCU Michigan game. I think it's going to come down to the perimeter. And Ryan, I get it, the interior. I just think Ohio State's going to play a little better than we think. And I think that 38-35 is going to be with Georgia scoring late. I actually think Ohio State's going to play really well in this game. Now, it's going to be a lot like the Notre Dame game. I think Ohio State either wins convincingly or gets whooped convincingly. I don't think it's going to be a close game. And the reason I say that is I've said this to you before. This is not last year's Georgia team. They're not. And people can say all they want about they've been a good team this year. This is not as good of a Georgia team as it was last year. They played a schedule that was relatively just not good. They were able to whoop up on Tennessee pretty good, no doubt. That was a great win. And that was the first game where I'm like, okay, I got that one wrong because I picked Tennessee to win that game. So Georgia's made me look bad before. Would not be the first time. But I think this Ohio State team is much better in the trenches than that Tennessee team is, and I think this Ohio State team's better on defense. They're not great on defense, but they're much better. This is also a Georgia team that struggled to beat Missouri, looked bad against Kent State. It's a Georgia team that looked ugly against Kentucky. They did not play very well against Georgia Tech. They just had way better players than Georgia Tech, and a team that defensively got rolled by LSU. I mean, LSU's offense moved the ball against Georgia from start to finish. That game turned because Brian Polian's a bad special teams coach and because LSU's defense was terrible. And this is a much different animal than what LSU's offense was, with all due respect to LSU. Ohio State's going to have the weapons. I think they're going to take those shots down the field. I think they're going to hit those shots down the field. I think Ryan Day is going to be more aggressive, and they're going to use this whole we're being disrespected, nobody thinks they're going to win thing against them. I really think this is a kind of matchup that's dangerous for Georgia. And we've seen it at times this year. What was one of the things Missouri was able to do in that game, Ryan? What did they have that helped them be in that game for a while? Really talented receivers, right? Mm-hmm. Really talented receivers. And they made some plays early. And I just think this is a game where Ohio State's going to come out and play well. I don't know why I think they're going to look different than they have all year, and that's the silliness of this prediction. I'm going to be completely honest with you. It's just I've been waiting on this Ohio State team to show up all year. And it reminds me a lot of 2020 when I just was – Ohio State for the entire year played uninspired football, very uninspired football. And then they come out in the semifinal game and just rolled Clemson. Now, the reason they lost to Bama is because Bama was way better than them. I don't think this Georgia team's as nearly as good as that Bama 2020 team. I could be wrong, but I just, as you know, I've been consistent. I could be wrong, Ryan, but I've been at least consistent about this. I've not been blown away by this Georgia team relative to what they were last year. Mm-hmm. And that's what it boils down to for me. I think Ohio State's talent is going to show up in this game. And I think skill-wise, Ohio State's got better players than Georgia does in this matchup. I do. The question is going to be, can Ohio State play well enough in the trenches to have some semblance of balance? Because if Georgia shuts their run game down, Ohio State will not be able to win this football game. They have to be balanced enough to be able to create some of those wins on the outside. Because if Georgia can just stop them with their box, which is their 3 down and their 2 insides, Ohio State has no chance. No chance. Mm-hmm. But I think CJ Stroud's going to go off. I think they're going to have a really hard time defending all the weapons that Ohio State's going to have in the pass game. That's where I'm at in this one. So I am going with Ohio State to win 38-35, and we're going to have a very interesting national title game. So that's my –
you went with the
both
double
upsets. Both upsets. Yeah. And again, I'm going to end up looking dumb on both of them, but I've just kind of had this gut for a week that I'm just like, I just think this playoff is not going to play out the way people think it is. You know,
stick with your gut, man.
I could be wrong. I could be wrong, but that's just kind of where I see it. So there we are, Ryan. That's all of our predictions and previews. So now I get to wrap this up and start heading to the airport so I can head down to Jacksonville for the Gator Bowl. I'm very excited about that. We had a couple super chats that we want to get to before we roll, however. Shamrocker with a super chat, thank you very much. Did you see that Lou Holtz picked South Carolina to win 34-27? Thoughts? I think that is Lou Holtz playing mind games. That's what I think that is.
And he does have some allegiance to both programs as well, too, right? So,
that's right.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think much about it. It is what it is. So.
Yeah. JJ Goodway with super chat. Thank you, JJ. What would be better for Notre Dame on Friday? Buckner and the offense having a great game and a loss where the defense struggles, or Notre Dame winning a defensive battle where the offense struggles? Ryan, this is easy. Winning.
Yes.
Whatever option results in winning. Like, I don't care if the offense looks great if you lose. It doesn't matter.
Right. Yeah, winning, it's always winning, most of all, just for me in general. But then also, you have reinforcements coming offensively, right? Like if Kyler Buckner ends up not being the guy, we know that there's going to be a grad transfer quarterback coming in to potentially be the guy, right? So this isn't the end-all, be-all type of situation offensively. Notre Dame needs to win, though, to propel themselves into the offseason with a little bit of confidence, though. That's what needs to happen, in my opinion.
I will never say a loss is better than a win. Never.
I mean,
against the same opponent, right?
Last year against Oklahoma State, was everyone like, "Oh man, we weren't very good," but at least Jack Combs threw for 500 yards.
Right.
Like we lost, right? Like you lost.
Exactly. Because basically, what he's saying there is we have a repeat of last year's bowl game. Is basically what he's saying, and I don't want that. I want a win. I don't care if it's a 41-38 win. Like when I first read this question, I read it as a win where the offense plays great and the defense doesn't, or a win where it's a defensive battle and the offense struggles. That's how I read it at first. And what I was going to say there was I'd rather see the offensive shootout because I feel like Marcus Freeman will get the defense figured out either by having Al Golden fix it or he will find someone else to fix it, right? Marcus Freeman is not going to tolerate the defense getting ripped. I mean, we saw that last year. But if the offense plays well in a shootout, then you start feeling good about the potential of this offense to kind of go into next season and get things turned around. I would much rather see a win in a shootout than a win in a close game where the offense still struggles for me. That's how I read it at first. And then I saw the loss part and I was like, oh, that's an easy one. That's an easy one.
I'm never going to pick a loss. Ever going to pick a loss.
The only time I've ever said that is like, would you be better off going and playing some bowl game against somebody that nobody matters or making a playoff game where you go play Alabama in a tough game and you lose? That's one of the few exceptions, but it's not the same opponent. It's you're better off beating South Carolina or going to the playoff and losing to Alabama by 3 in a game where, you show everybody that you can go toe to toe with them. That's the only time.
It's an apples to oranges comparison at that point. Right.
Yep. Milton Fan 15 with the super chat. Thank you very much. What are your sources telling you about how Tyler Buckner is looking in bowl prep? Do we know who is starting at Viper or on the D line? So as far as that, I mean, I've heard plenty of stuff, but I just, to me, it doesn't matter. We always hear about how good Tyler Buckner looks in practice. It doesn't matter. I had a friend of mine who went to bowl prep, and he called me up. He's like, man, Tyler looked really good. He looked as good as I've ever seen him throw the ball. And this is someone who was very down on Tyler coming into the regular season. But so what? I've talked to other sources within the program. Oh, he's had a great camp. He was really sharp throwing the ball, like in the individual drills at the end of the season. And then he's been really good in 7-on-7 and team and et cetera, et cetera. Don't care. Doesn't matter. We've heard that before. I need to see him play well on Saturday or on Friday in game day. That's what matters. It doesn't matter the bowl prep. D-line wise, I mean, I expect Justin Adamiola to be the base defensive starter at Viper. I expect that. We'll kind of see how that pans out. But the rest of the D-line will probably – I would predict – I don't know who it's going to be. My prediction is they're going to slide Riley Mills inside a 3 technique and then have Nana starting at big end would be my prediction. I don't know that for a fact, though, but that would be my prediction for this game.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yep. Milton Fan also would have another one says, is there a cooler position name than Viper? That's a pretty cool name. Unless you're afraid of snakes, then it's like, that's a terrible name. Yeah, I get it.
Trying to think of. I feel like there was a defensive system that there was a position named Psycho at one point. And Psycho's pretty
like
awesome.
Hero. There's one where Hero is. I like that. That's a good
call.
One. It's a good one.
Would you have loved to? I mean, you're not a defensive guy, right? But like I played linebacker, and I would have loved to play a position that's just Psycho. Like, let's do that. Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah,
head through a windshield.
You know me. I mean, I played defense in high school, Ryan. So I played corner in high school. But mine would have been. I play hero. What position do you play? I'm the hero. That would have been the one for me. But just difference in personality. Linebacker, skill player. All right, David Prevo with Super Chat. Thank you, David. What do we need to see from Tyler in this game to keep him from in the conversation next year? Hate to get down on the guy, but injuries, but enough excuses. Look, the injuries are just, I mean, that is what it is, right? But it's Tyler Buckner's issues aren't just injuries. I mean, that hurt his development. But look, what we saw in the Marshall game was him not playing with a sense of urgency and him not being able to throw the ball accurately. That's what we saw. Now, is that who he is, or was that just him as a young guy getting on the same page with a bunch of new receivers? We'll find out, right? But he's got to show that he can make quick decisions and be accurate throwing the football. That's what and he's got to play with a sense of urgency. He does not play with a lot of urgency. And the concern is, as you meet Tyler, he's a very calm, mild-mannered kid, and that's all fine and dandy. But you need to see that kind of ramped up when the game was on. And the problem is with Tyler is we haven't seen that. We haven't seen that sense of urgency when he's in the game. And that's what I need to see from him. Is just, I mean, you see that thing, you catch that ball, you get in your stance and you rip that ball, you let her rip and get it out there. Don't kind of have that slow catch and methodical and then, oh, shoot, the corner stepped in front of it and picked it off. Play with more urgency, make good decisions, and get the ball out accurately, right? Those are the 3 things for me. I have no doubting his arm talent he can throw the ball, he can make every throw he needs to make. He can obviously run around and do all that, but those things are things, Ryan, where, I mean, his anticipation when he's on is excellent, but now it's time to translate it to Saturday and show that you can throw the ball accurately. I've heard he has in bowl prep, but again, I don't care what you do in bowl prep where there's no pressure. Let me see you do it in the bowl game. That's going to be what matters to me.
I think urgency is a good way to put it, honestly, because, I mean, let's call it what it is, right? There's going to be a grad transfer coming in here after the bowl game. And Tyler's going to have to fight every day to be the guy, potentially, right? So if there's any push to be urgent, it's right now, man, because you are literally playing one day at a time to be the guy and potentially be the future. You have to come to this game with a sense of urgency. You have to come into the offseason with a sense of urgency. Everything you do has to be urgent at this point because you're running out of opportunities, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. And the last super chat here from Alan Watson is most important question for the boys was what was in their gift bags this year? Ryan, you want to go ahead and take a shot at that for Christmas?
Are we talking about Christmas presents? Oh, I'm an old man now, so I just enjoyed my holiday watching my daughter open up all her presents, and I got the usual socks, boxers, and some shirts. It was, which was fine with me. I did get a nice little speaker that you put in the. I like listening to podcasts and music when I'm in the shower, so I got this nice waterproof little speaker that would be cool. But otherwise, just the old man stuff at this point.
Yeah, we didn't really do presents this year, and we didn't have anything wrapped under the Christmas tree. We got kind of busy. My wife and I, she's also a business owner, so we got a little bit slammed. But one thing we did do is, so we didn't really have a Christmas gift bag. We didn't put our stockings up this year, but what we did is we bought new chairs for our fireplace room. So we have a room with a fireplace. It's where we put our tree. We bought 2 recliners, so they're really nice, and they massage and they heat a little bit. It's not a great heater, but it heats a little bit. So we just kind of hung out in those, had hot cocoa, and my wife let a fire go. That's really all we did for Christmas. This is going to be the last one because I do got to get rolling here. We got a super chat from ICURN with Irish Luck. Thank you very, very much. He goes, how do you compare Javon McKinley and Jalen Greathouse coming out of high school? Both had amazing high school careers. Different body, obviously, but compare how they both come in with such high floors. I'm take a crack at this one, Ryan. First of all, I addressed this on the board as well. This is a good question. For me, it depends on which version of Javon McKinley. I mean, they both had much better junior years than senior years, for different reasons, right? Javon had some injuries. Jaden had a different quarterback, so things looked a little bit different. They're both great pass catchers. They both had great ball skills. Javon, that's the one thing Javon had at Notre Dame, had great ball skills. They're both strong. I would say Jaden is more advanced route-wise and technically than Javon was. Javon was more explosive coming in high school. Javon was not as explosive when his career ended as he was coming in. He had some multiple lower body injuries. He didn't have the same kind of force of just kind of going out. Javon's issues were more about Javon than Notre Dame, in my opinion. Like, there's been a lot of issues with developing receivers. I don't fault them for Javon. We saw him finally kind of put it together in 2020. He's pretty good. He's pretty good that year, Ryan, and played well in their biggest games. That's the other thing about Javon is Javon played well when the games mattered. He had some great plays against Clemson early, played very well. I mean, just ripped. I mean, North Carolina could not cover him, and that was a big game for Notre Dame. And I thought he played well against Bama when he just wasn't given the football, wasn't thrown the football. And the one time he did, he made a great catch. So I thought Javon, and he should have scored a touchdown on Notre Dame's first drive against Clemson, but Ian just didn't throw him the ball. But I think Jaden they're different players. Javon is more of a pure outside guy. I think Jaden is a little shorter, can play inside and outside because of that route running. But both very high floors, Ryan. I think Jaden Greathouse has a higher floor. I felt Javon McKinley had a higher ceiling if he would have put in the work. That's my take on those two players. What's your thoughts?
I never really watched. I mean, I remember the highlights for Javon coming out, but I didn't really break him down. Like I remember that one insane catch he was at Centennial, right? That's where he went to school. Corona Centennial. Remember that catch he made behind his back or whatever, where he stabbed it with one hand? He was insane during his career at Centennial, especially as a junior. Yeah. But I mean, from what I remember,
his junior year when he had over 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns in the playoffs.
He was pretty good, man.
Against De La Salle and Orange Lutheran and Gardena Serra. And you know what I mean? Like, he was playing St. John Bosco. Yeah, that playoff. Yeah, that'd be accurate.
He was pretty good, man. It was pretty. I could definitely see where you come with the upside versus floor conversation, though, because I do remember that I was super excited when Javon McKinley came out. I thought he was going to be a guy, and then obviously some injuries and such kind of stunted growth a little bit.
Some other things off the field.
Yeah, some other things. Yes.
Yeah.
But the one thing I love about Jaden Greathouse, which I can't comment on Javon because I don't know Javon. Was never around Javon, right? Like just don't know enough about him from a personal perspective. But Jaden Greathouse is a dog, man. Like, and he has that competitive fire that is hard to quantify. And I think that might be a separator because I don't think anybody's going to outwork Jaden Greathouse the minute he gets on campus. So while that was a big
difference, Ryan. That's a great point because Javon didn't have that. Like, we saw it as a senior. He didn't have that same. Like, I felt like Javon. Yeah, I think I don't even get. You nailed it. I think yes, Jaden will not be a kid that comes in here and doesn't work. He will not be a kid that comes in here and doesn't play with a lot of fire, a lot of hunger. I don't think Javon had that as much. I think he figured it out late, but even then, it wasn't the same as what Greathouse would be. He was much longer than Jaden is too. Like Javon was 6'2.5" with really long arms. So just different players in a lot of ways. But yeah, it's a good question. Good question and good answers, Ryan. So that's going to do it for today's show, everybody. Thank you all so much for being with us. Before we leave, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. Make sure that you are signed up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Make sure you check out our main website at irishbreakdown.com where all of our free content can be found, including so far we have our Keys to Victory for the Notre Dame offense article up. We'll have some others up. All of our bowl predictions articles where the whole staff makes their predictions. We predict a lot of bowl games, Ryan. You can find those on our side of these next few days as well. Make sure that if you're listening via podcast, we would greatly appreciate a 5-star review. Very, very much. Make sure you sign up and subscribe to, I should say, the CFB Nation podcast channel, and also watch the videos that we are putting up on the CFB Nation YouTube channel. We would greatly, greatly appreciate that very, very much. So for Ryan, I'm Brian. Have a great rest of your day. We will talk to you again soon. These guys will be back tomorrow after the bowl game to do a post-game show. It'll be Ryan, Sean, and Vince. Vince, Jesse, and Sean Stiers will do the countdown to kickoff from 10 to noon tomorrow. These guys will be back right after there. And then, of course, on Sunday, we'll be back. I'll be back with upon further review, breakdown. And then it's time, Ryan, to dive into 2023 season. And there's going to be a lot to talk about, a lot of fun to talk about. We'll have a lot to talk about at the quarterback position after the bowl game is over as well. So everybody have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you again very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.